At 11:28 p.m. on August 6, 1943, Commander Frederick Moosbrugger stood on the bridge of USS Dunlap in absolute darkness off Vella Gulf, watching radar operators track 4 Japanese destroyers racing toward him at 30 knots. 45 years old, 23 months of Pacific combat, 0 night torpedo victories. The Japanese were running another Tokyo Express, the high-speed destroyer runs that had dominated these waters for a year. Fast warships, loaded with troops and supplies, racing down the slot under cover of darkness, unloading at Kolombangara, gone before American aircraft could find them at dawn. Tonight would be different. Moosbrugger commanded 6 destroyers divided into 2 divisions. Division 12, Dunlap, Craven, and Maury. Division 15, Lang, Sterett, and Stack. Behind him in the darkness, 120 torpedoes sat in launch tubes. Mark 15 torpedoes, steam-powered, 21-inch diameter, 3,000-yard range, the same weapons that had failed spectacularly in 1942, running too deep, failing to detonate, betraying American submarines and surface ships in engagement after engagement. But the Bureau of Ordnance had finally fixed the depth control problem, finally fixed the magnetic exploders. The Mark 15 worked now. Probably. Moosbrugger had never fired one in combat. Nobody in his divisions had. The Japanese destroyers approaching through the darkness had sunk more American ships than any other surface force in the Pacific. 6 months earlier, at the Battle of Tassafaronga, 8 Japanese destroyers had devastated an American cruiser force. 1 American cruiser sunk, 3 more crippled, 400 sailors dead. The Japanese escaped without losing a single ship. Their Type 93 Longlands torpedoes had a 20-mile range and left no wake. American lookouts never saw them coming until steel warheads detonated against hull plates. Tonight, the Japanese expected the same result. 4 destroyers, veteran crews, every ship, a Tokyo Express veteran racing at 30 knots toward Kolombangara with 900 troops and 50 tons of supplies. Standard run. Standard tactics, load, unload, escape before dawn. They had done it 30 times. If you want to see how Moosbrugger turned 6 American destroyers into the deadliest ambush in the Pacific War, please hit that like button. It helps us share more World War II stories. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Moosbrugger. The plan was his. Simple, aggressive, everything the Navy had avoided in night combat since Tassafaronga. No cruisers, no heavy ships, just destroyers. Fast, maneuverable, expendable. Position the divisions on opposite sides of Vella Gulf. Wait in complete darkness. No lights, no radar emissions until the last possible moment. Let the Japanese enter the kill zone. Then launch every torpedo simultaneously from both sides. Saturate the target area. The Japanese couldn't dodge 60 torpedoes coming from 2 directions. Physics wouldn't allow it. But the plan required perfect timing. Launch too early and the Japanese would see the torpedo wakes, turn away, escape. Launch too late, and the divisions would be inside minimum torpedo range, forced into a gun duel against ships that had never lost a night gun action. The margin between victory and disaster was measured in seconds. Moosbrugger had positioned his divisions at 2000 hours, 4 hours before the Japanese were expected. Dunlap, Craven, and Maury formed Division 12 on the western side of Vella Gulf. Lang, Sterett, and Stack formed Division 15 on the eastern side. 6 miles separated them. Between them lay the killing ground. The wait was silent. Crews at battle stations, guns loaded, torpedoes in tubes. Every man knew the statistics. American destroyers had a 40% survival rate in night surface actions. Japanese destroyers had a 95% survival rate. The mathematics were clear. But Moosbrugger had one advantage the Japanese didn't know about: radar. Not the early war radar that barely worked in rain. Not the temperamental systems that failed when you needed them most. The new SG surface search radar, 10-centimeter wavelength. It could detect ships at 20 miles in any weather. It could track speed, bearing, and formation. It gave American ships eyes in the darkness. The Japanese had nothing comparable. They relied on optical rangefinders, binoculars, lookouts with exceptional night vision. On a moonless night in the Solomon Islands, with cloud cover blocking starlight, visibility dropped to zero. The Japanese destroyers were racing blind into an ambush they couldn't see. At 23:24 hours, USS Lang's radar detected 4 contacts bearing 310 degrees, range 22 miles. The contacts were moving southeast at high speed. Division 15's commander, Commander Bernard Austin, reported to Moosbrugger by radio. 4 ships, probable Japanese destroyers. Speed 30 knots, course 140, heading directly toward the Gulf. Moosbrugger calculated intercept geometry in his head. The Japanese would enter the kill zone in approximately 35 minutes. At 23:28 hours, he transmitted orders to all ships. Maintain position. Maintain radio silence except essential reports. Weapons free at 3,000 yards. Division 12 would attack from the west. Division 15 from the east. Coordinated torpedo launch. Every ship would fire half its torpedoes on the initial spread. Hold the remainder for follow-up attacks. The Japanese destroyers were Hagakaze, Arashi, Kawakaze, and Shigure. Destroyer Division 4, veterans of every major surface action since Pearl Harbor. Hagakaze had fought at Midway. Arashi had bombarded Henderson Field. Kawakaze had sunk 2 American destroyers off Guadalcanal. Shigure had survived Tassafaronga and escaped without damage. These were not inexperienced crews. These were the best the Imperial Japanese Navy had. They were also completely unaware that 6 American destroyers were waiting in the darkness ahead. Japanese doctrine emphasized aggressive night attacks, rush toward the enemy, launch torpedoes at maximum range, break away at high speed. The tactics had worked for a year. No American force had successfully countered them. But those tactics assumed the Americans would be where Japanese commanders expected them, in line formation, steaming predictably, visible against the horizon. Moosbrugger's divisions weren't in line formation. They were positioned in a V-shaped ambush pattern. The Japanese were sailing into the apex. At 23:54 hours, USS Dunlap's radar showed the Japanese formation at 12 miles. The contacts had maintained course and speed. No deviation, no indication they suspected anything. Moosbrugger ordered his division to increase speed to 25 knots. The destroyers surged forward through the darkness. No lights, no wakes visible in the black water. Just the vibration of turbines driving 1,500-ton warships toward engagement range. Division 15 mirrored the movement on the opposite side of the Gulf. By 23:58 hours, the ambush was set. 2 divisions of American destroyers converging on a Japanese formation that had no idea they were there. At midnight on August 7, 1943, USS Lang detected the Japanese formation at 6 miles. Moosbrugger received the report and watched his own radar plot. The Japanese destroyers were in column formation, single file, standard Tokyo Express configuration, perfect target presentation for torpedo attack. At 0008 hours, range dropped to 4,500 yards. Moosbrugger could see nothing through his binoculars, just darkness. But radar showed 4 distinct targets, perfectly positioned between his 2 divisions. He picked up the radio handset and transmitted one word: execute. USS Dunlap's torpedo officer pressed the firing key. 5 Mark 15 torpedoes launched from the port tubes in rapid sequence. Compressed air ejected each weapon. Steam motors ignited. The torpedoes accelerated to 45 knots, running at 10-foot depth, heading toward the Japanese formation. USS Craven launched 5 torpedoes 2 seconds later. USS Maury launched 5 more. Division 12 had put 15 torpedoes in the water in less than 10 seconds. On the opposite side of the Gulf, Division 15 executed simultaneously. USS Lang launched 5 torpedoes. USS Sterett launched 5. USS Stack launched 5. Another 15 torpedoes running toward the Japanese from the opposite direction. 30 torpedoes total, spread across a 1,000-yard front, converging on 4 destroyers from 2 directions. The Japanese had approximately 90 seconds before impact. On the bridge of Hagikaze, Commander Sugura Kaju stood near the helm, watching the darkness ahead. The Tokyo Express run was proceeding normally. No American aircraft. No radio intercepts suggesting enemy awareness. The usual smooth operation. Then his lookout started shouting, "Torpedo wakes, port side, multiple wakes." Sugura spun toward the bearing. In the darkness, he could see them. Faint phosphorescent trails on the black water. 4 torpedoes, no, 6, heading directly toward his ship. He ordered hard right rudder. Hagikaze began her turn. Too late. The first Mark 15 struck Hagikaze amidships at 0010 hours. 300 pounds of torpex. Explosive detonated against the destroyer's hull. The blast tore through the engine room. Seawater flooded in. Hagikaze's speed dropped from 30 knots to 0 in 15 seconds. The second torpedo hit 20 seconds later. Forward magazine. The explosion was massive. Hagikaze's bow lifted out of the water. The destroyer broke in half. Both sections remained afloat for approximately 40 seconds. Then they slipped beneath the surface. 200 Japanese sailors went down with the ship. 15 survivors made it into the water. Arashi, second in the Japanese column, had 3 seconds more warning than Hagikaze. Her captain ordered emergency turn to starboard. The destroyer heeled over at maximum rudder angle, but the turn presented Arashi's full beam to the torpedo spread. 4 Mark 15 struck simultaneously. 1 hit forward of the bridge, 1 hit the engine room, 2 hit aft, near the stern. Arashi disintegrated. The destroyer didn't sink. It ceased to exist. Debris rained across 200 yards of ocean. No survivors. Kawakazi's captain saw Arashi explode. He ordered full reverse on all engines. The destroyer shuddered as her turbines fought to slow 1,500 tons of forward momentum. She was still making 20 knots when 3 torpedoes hit her port side. The first blew off her bow. The second penetrated the forward engine room. The third detonated in the after magazine. Kawakaze rolled onto her port side and sank in less than 60 seconds. Shigure, the 4th destroyer, survived. Her captain, Commander Tamechi Hara, was one of the Imperial Japanese Navy's most experienced destroyer commanders. He had fought at nearly every major surface action in the Solomons. He understood night combat better than almost anyone in the Japanese fleet. When the first torpedoes hit Hagikaze, Hara was already ordering emergency turn. Shigure heeled hard to port. Full power. Maximum rudder. The destroyer turned inside the torpedo spread. 3 Mark 15 passed astern. 2 more passed ahead. 1 torpedo struck Shigure's stern, but the warhead failed to detonate. A dud. The only Mark 15 failure of the entire engagement. Hara kept turning. He reversed course 180 degrees and fled northwest at 35 knots. In 3 minutes, the battle was over. 3 Japanese destroyers sunk. The 4th escaping. 900 Japanese troops and sailors dead. Only Shigure survived to report what happened. The American destroyers had not fired a single gun. Moosbrugger tracked Shigure's retreat on radar. The Japanese destroyer was outside torpedo range and accelerating. He considered pursuit, but decided against it. The ambush had succeeded beyond any prediction. 3 confirmed kills, 0 American casualties, no damage to any American ship. Why risk that outcome chasing a single fleeing destroyer? At 0014 hours, 6 minutes after the first torpedo launch, Moosbrugger ordered his divisions to sweep the area for survivors. Not Japanese survivors. American ships always rescued enemy sailors when possible, but there were no survivors to rescue. Kawakaze and Arashi had disintegrated. Hagikaze had sunk so quickly that almost no one escaped. The destroyers found debris fields, life jackets, floating wreckage, bodies, but no living Japanese sailors. The ocean had claimed them all. At 0034 hours, Division 12 detected a small boat on radar, possibly a Japanese landing craft that had been towed by one of the destroyers. USS Dunlap closed to investigate. As the destroyer approached, lookouts spotted 15 men in the water, clinging to the boat, survivors from Hagikaze. Dunlap came alongside and recovered all 15. They were the only Japanese sailors to survive the battle. The men were pulled aboard, given blankets and water, and taken below. Standard treatment for prisoners of war. Medical corpsmen checked for injuries. One sailor had a broken arm. 2 others had minor burns. The rest were uninjured but in shock. One of the survivors was a junior officer. Through an interpreter, he asked what had hit them. The Americans told him torpedoes. He asked how many American ships were involved. 6 destroyers, the interpreter replied. The Japanese officer was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that the interpreter translated as impossible. American destroyers cannot do this. But they had. At 0045 hours, Moosbrugger ordered his divisions to reform and withdraw. The mission was complete. The Tokyo Express had been destroyed. The ambush had worked exactly as planned. The 6 American destroyers steamed northwest at 25 knots, leaving the debris field behind. By dawn, they were 100 miles from Vella Gulf. At 0600 hours, American patrol aircraft flew over the battle site. They reported oil slicks, floating debris, and no intact Japanese vessels. The pilots radioed confirmation. 3 Japanese destroyers destroyed. The news reached Guadalcanal by 0800 hours. Admiral William Halsey, Commander South Pacific, read the after-action report and immediately sent a message to Moosbrugger. Congratulations on a superbly executed action. You have written a new chapter in destroyer tactics. The Battle of Vella Gulf was the first clear-cut American victory in a night surface action against Japanese destroyers. Previous engagements had been draws at best, disasters at worst: Tassafaronga, First Guadalcanal, Savo Island. The Japanese had dominated every night battle. Until August 7, 1943. The tactical innovations were significant. Moosbrugger had positioned his destroyers in an ambush rather than meeting the Japanese head-on. He had used radar to achieve surprise. He had coordinated attacks from multiple directions, and he had proven that the Mark 15 torpedo, after 2 years of failures, finally worked. The strategic impact was equally important. The Tokyo Express had been the Japanese lifeline to their forces in the Solomon Islands. Fast destroyer runs supplied troops that could not be supplied any other way. American air superiority prevented daylight supply runs. The Tokyo Express was the only option. But after Vella Gulf, the Tokyo Express became a death sentence. Japanese commanders could not risk losing destroyers in ambushes they couldn't predict. The destroyer runs became less frequent. Garrisons in the Solomons began starving. American ground forces gained the advantage. Within 6 months, the Japanese would evacuate the Solomon Islands entirely. The Battle of Vella Gulf didn't single-handedly win the Solomons campaign, but it eliminated Japan's ability to sustain their forces there, and it did so in 26 minutes. At 1200 hours on August 7th, the 6 American destroyers arrived at Purvis Bay, their base near Guadalcanal. Crews secured from battle stations. Damage control parties stood down. There was no damage to control, no casualties to treat, no repairs to make. The destroyers had executed a perfect ambush and returned without a scratch. Moosbrugger filed his after-action report that afternoon. The document was thorough, technical, and understated. It described radar contact at 23:24 hours, torpedo launch at 0008 hours, 3 confirmed sinks by 0011 hours. 15 torpedoes fired by Division 12. 15 fired by Division 15. At least 9 hits confirmed. 30% hit rate. The pre-war Bureau of Ordnance would have called that impossible. Torpedoes didn't work that reliably. Except now they did. The Mark 15's failures had been catastrophic in 1942. Submarines fired torpedoes that ran under targets without exploding. Destroyers launched spreads that detonated prematurely, or not at all. The magnetic exploders were too sensitive or not sensitive enough. The depth control was miscalibrated. The contact exploders were too fragile. Every mechanism that could fail did fail. But by mid-1943, the Bureau of Ordnance had finally admitted the problems existed and fixed them. The Mark 15 that American destroyers carried to Vella Gulf was a completely different weapon than the torpedo that had failed at Tassafaronga 8 months earlier. Moosbrugger's success proved it. 9 hits out of 30 torpedoes, 7 actually struck targets. 2 missed, but exploded in the water near Kawakazi, causing additional damage. 1 hit Shigure, but failed to detonate, the only malfunction of the entire engagement. The Japanese survivors, once they recovered from shock, provided additional intelligence. The 15 men rescued from Hagikaze were interrogated at length. They confirmed what American commanders suspected. The Japanese had no radar. They had no advance warning. They sailed into Vella Gulf completely unaware that American destroyers were waiting. One survivor, a petty officer, described the moment the torpedoes hit. He said the first explosion lifted him off the deck. When he stood up, the ship was already sinking. He jumped into the water and swam away from the suction. He heard Arashi explode behind him, saw Kawakazi's magazine detonate, watched all 3 destroyers disappear in less than 2 minutes. He thought American cruisers had ambushed them. He couldn't believe destroyers had done this. Commander Tamichihara, captain of Shigure, the only Japanese ship to escape, wrote about Vella Gulf after the war. His account was detailed, technical, and haunted by the memory of what happened. Hara described sailing into a perfect trap. He wrote that American tactics had suddenly improved dramatically. He noted that 3 of the best destroyers in the Imperial Navy had been obliterated in minutes. He concluded that something fundamental had changed in the Pacific Naval War. He was right. American destroyer tactics had evolved. Radar had matured into a reliable combat tool. Torpedoes finally worked, and aggressive commanders like Moosbrugger were willing to take risks that previous doctrine had discouraged. The combination was lethal. The Imperial Japanese Navy analyzed the battle and identified the problem immediately. The Americans had achieved surprise through superior technology. Japanese lookouts couldn't see what radar could detect. Japanese commanders couldn't plan for threats they couldn't see. The solution, according to Japanese analysts, was to equip destroyers with radar. But Japan's radar technology lagged years behind American development. The Type 22 surface search radar that Japanese ships began receiving in late 1943 was roughly equivalent to American radar from 1941. It couldn't match the range or precision of the SG radar that American destroyers carried. The Japanese attempted to compensate with improved night optical equipment, better binoculars, more powerful searchlights, enhanced training for lookouts. None of it closed the gap. By late 1943, American destroyers owned the night. Moosbrugger received the Navy Cross for the Battle of Vella Gulf. The citation recognized his brilliant tactical leadership and innovative approach to destroyer combat. He remained in command of Destroyer Squadron 12 through the end of 1943 and into 1944. He participated in numerous additional actions, but Vella Gulf remained his defining engagement. The battle where he proved that American destroyers could beat Japanese destroyers at their own game. The 6 destroyers that fought at Vella Gulf continued serving in the Pacific. USS Dunlap participated in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. USS Lang fought at Okinawa. USS Sterett earned 11 battle stars. All 6 ships survived the war. The Mark 15 torpedo that finally worked at Vella Gulf remained in American service through the end of World War II. Submarines, destroyers, and PT boats fired thousands of them. The reliability issues that had plagued the weapon in 1942 never returned. The hit rates improved dramatically. By 1945, American torpedoes were among the most reliable in any navy. The Battle of Vella Gulf was not the largest night surface action of the Pacific War. It was not the longest. It was not the most casualties. But it was the first time American destroyers had decisively beaten Japanese destroyers in a night engagement. The first time American tactics, technology, and training had combined to achieve total surprise and overwhelming victory. And it happened in 26 minutes of darkness on a moonless night in the Solomon Islands. 3 Japanese destroyers destroyed, 6 American destroyers untouched, 900 enemy soldiers and sailors killed, 0 American casualties. The mathematics of night combat had suddenly shifted. The Tokyo Express that had dominated the Solomon Islands for a year was now a death trap. And the Imperial Japanese Navy knew it. Over the following months, Tokyo Express runs became increasingly rare. When they did occur, Japanese commanders took elaborate precautions. Multiple destroyer groups, circuitous routes, maximum speed both ways. Even then, losses mounted. American destroyers using Moosbrugger's ambush tactics claimed more victims. By early 1944, the Tokyo Express had ceased operations entirely. The Japanese could no longer afford to lose destroyers. But the story of Vella Gulf extended far beyond one night in August 1943. The battle represented a turning point in American naval doctrine, technology, and confidence. 3 months before Vella Gulf, American destroyer commanders approached night combat with dread. The Japanese owned the darkness. Their superior optical equipment, their long-lance torpedoes, their aggressive tactics had proven devastating in engagement after engagement. American doctrine emphasized defensive formations, mutual support, and avoiding night combat when possible. Moosbrugger had thrown that doctrine out completely. He positioned his ships offensively. He used darkness as an advantage rather than an obstacle. He trusted his radar absolutely, and he executed an ambush that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. The radar technology that made Vella Gulf possible had evolved rapidly through 1942 and 1943. The SG surface search radar installed on American destroyers by mid-1943 was the 4th generation of the technology. Earlier versions had been unreliable. They failed in rain. They couldn't distinguish ships from land masses. They gave false readings that led to friendly fire incidents. The SG radar was different. It used 10-centimeter wavelength transmissions that penetrated weather. It had sufficient resolution to identify individual ships in formation. It provided accurate range and bearing data that fire control systems could use directly. Most importantly, it worked. Operators trusted it. Commanders based tactical decisions on it. At Vella Gulf, radar had proven itself as the decisive weapon in night combat. The Bureau of Ships studied Moosbrugger's action and identified key lessons. First, radar-equipped destroyers could achieve tactical surprise against optically equipped opponents. Second, coordinated torpedo attacks from multiple directions overwhelmed enemy defensive maneuvers. Third, American destroyers no longer needed cruiser support for night operations. These lessons were incorporated into training programs at Newport and San Diego. New destroyer commanders learned Moosbrugger's tactics. Practice exercises simulated ambush scenarios. Torpedo tactics emphasized coordinated spreads rather than single-ship launches. By late 1943, every American destroyer in the Pacific was being trained to fight like the ships at Vella Gulf. The Imperial Japanese Navy also studied Vella Gulf. Their analysis was detailed and accurate. Japanese naval intelligence identified radar as the critical American advantage. They recognized that American destroyers had achieved complete surprise. They understood that coordinated torpedo attacks from multiple directions were nearly impossible to evade. But understanding the problem didn't provide solutions. Japanese industry couldn't produce radar systems comparable to American equipment. Japanese tactical doctrine had been built around optical superiority in night combat. Changing that doctrine required admitting that fundamental assumptions were wrong. Some Japanese commanders refused to accept that American technology had surpassed theirs. Vice Admiral Nishimura Shoji, who would die at the Battle of Surigao Strait, believed Japanese night-fighting spirit could overcome American radar. He was wrong. At Surigao Strait in October 1944, American battleships and destroyers using radar fire control would annihilate Nishimura's force in history's last battleship versus battleship engagement. The pattern established at Vella Gulf repeated at larger scale. American radar, Japanese optical equipment, American victory. But in August 1943, Surigao Strait was 14 months in the future. The immediate impact of Vella Gulf was operational. Japanese commanders had to reconsider their entire supply strategy for the Solomon Islands. If destroyer runs were too dangerous, what alternatives existed? Submarines proved inadequate. Japanese fleet submarines were designed for fleet operations, not transport. They carried limited cargo. They made slow turnarounds. A submarine could deliver maybe 20 tons of supplies per trip. A destroyer carried 50 tons plus 900 troops. The mathematics didn't work. The Japanese attempted high-speed barge runs. Small craft, loaded with supplies, would hug the coastline at night, moving between islands. American PT boats hunted them relentlessly. Few barges completed their missions. By September 1943, Japanese garrisons in the Central Solomons were on half rations. By October, ammunition was critically short. By November, some units were starving. The Vella Gulf action had contributed directly to this supply crisis, not because 3 destroyers were sunk, but because the entire Tokyo Express system became untenable. Admiral Halsey's South Pacific Command understood this immediately. The August 10th intelligence summary from Halsey's headquarters specifically cited Vella Gulf as evidence that enemy destroyer operations in the Solomons can be successfully interdicted through aggressive night destroyer tactics. The summary recommended maximum employment of radar-equipped destroyer divisions in ambush positions along known enemy approach routes. Over the following months, American destroyers conducted dozens of such operations. Not all were successful. Not all achieved surprise. But the pattern was clear. American forces now hunted Japanese ships at night instead of hiding from them. The sailors who fought at Vella Gulf understood they had accomplished something significant. USS Dunlap's crew painted 3 Japanese flags on the ship's bridge, one for each destroyer sunk. USS Lang, Sterett, and Stack did the same. The ships became known as the Vella Gulf Squadron in fleet communications. Moosbrugger received dozens of letters from families of sailors who had died at earlier night battles. Tassafaronga, Savo Island. The parents and wives and children of men who had been killed when American ships couldn't fight effectively in the darkness. They thanked Moosbrugger for proving that American sailors could win, for showing the previous losses hadn't been inevitable, for giving meaning to deaths that had seemed pointless. Moosbrugger kept those letters for the rest of his life. The 15 Japanese survivors rescued from the water spent the remainder of the war in POW camps. They were initially held at Guadalcanal, then transferred to New Zealand, then to camps in the United States, standard procedure for Japanese prisoners. After the war, 12 of them returned to Japan. 3 had died in captivity from disease. The survivors were interviewed by Japanese naval historians researching night combat operations. Their accounts provided detailed descriptions of the battle from the Japanese perspective. One survivor, a boatswain's mate from Hagakaze, described the moment of impact. He had been on deck near the torpedo tubes when the first Mark 15 hit amidships. The explosion threw him against a bulkhead. When he recovered, the ship was listing heavily. He tried to reach his battle station, but the deck was too steep. Water was flooding through the torn hull. He jumped overboard and swam away from the sinking ship. He spent 2 hours in the water before American destroyers found him. He said he was certain he would die. Japanese sailors rarely survived night battles. Ships sank too quickly. The water was too dark to see rescue vessels. But American ships had rescued him, given him medical treatment, fed him, treated him humanely. He found that surprising. Japanese propaganda had told him Americans executed prisoners. Another survivor, an engineer from Hagikaze, provided technical details about the torpedo damage. He had been in the forward engine room when the explosion occurred. The blast penetrated the hull below the waterline. Seawater entered under tremendous pressure. The pumps couldn't keep up. Within 30 seconds, water had risen to chest height. He evacuated through the escape trunk and reached the deck just before the second torpedo hit. That explosion destroyed the forward magazine. He watched the bow section separate and sink. He was in the water when the stern went down. He described the suction as enormous. He nearly drowned before surfacing. These accounts confirmed what American damage assessment had concluded. The Mark 15 torpedoes had functioned exactly as designed. They ran at correct depth. They detonated on contact. They delivered lethal damage. The reliability that had eluded American torpedoes for 2 years had finally been achieved. Commander Tamechi Hara, the captain of Shigur who escaped the ambush, continued commanding destroyers through 1944. He fought at the Battle of Philippine Sea. He participated in the Battle of Vella Gulf. He survived the war, one of the few Japanese destroyer captains to do so. After the war, Hara wrote a memoir titled Japanese Destroyer Captain. The book included a detailed chapter on Vella Gulf. Hara described his split-second decision to reverse course when the first torpedoes hit. He wrote that he had sensed something wrong in the moments before Hagikaze exploded. The darkness had felt different. The radio traffic had sounded unusual. He couldn't identify specific threats, but his instincts told him danger was present. When Hagikaze blew up, Hara's training took over. Hard left rudder, full power, turn inside the torpedo spread. He estimated 6 torpedoes passed near Shigur. Only 1 hit, and it failed to detonate. He attributed his survival to luck and experience in equal measure. Hara's account also revealed Japanese tactical limitations. He wrote that Shigur had no radar contact on the American destroyers, no visual contact, no radio intercept warning. The ambush was complete and total. He noted that Japanese destroyer doctrine had no contingency plans for this scenario. They trained to attack, not to be attacked. They expected to achieve surprise, not to be surprised. Vella Gulf had reversed every assumption. After the war, American naval analysts studied the battle extensively. The Naval War College used it as a case study in destroyer tactics. The lessons were clear. Achieve surprise through superior technology. Position forces to create multiple attack vectors. Launch coordinated strikes that overwhelm defensive capabilities. Exploit enemy weaknesses ruthlessly. These principles would guide American destroyer operations through the rest of the war and into the Cold War era. The battle also influenced weapons development. The Mark 15 torpedoes' success at Vella Gulf justified continued production and improvement. By 1945, the Mark 15 had been upgraded with acoustic homing and variable speed settings. Post-war torpedoes incorporated these advances, leading directly to weapons like the Mark 48, still in service today. The SG radar's performance led to further radar development. The SG-6 model, introduced in 1944, had twice the range. Post-war radar systems built on the SG's basic principles, eventually producing the AN/SPS-10 radar used throughout the 1950s and 60s. The 6 destroyers that fought at Vella Gulf had varied post-war fates. USS Dunlap was decommissioned in 1946 and scrapped in 1948. USS Craven served until 1946, then was sold for scrap. USS Maury lasted slightly longer, decommissioned in 1946, and scrapped in 1947. USS Lang survived until 1946 before decommissioning. USS Sterett, which earned 11 battle stars, was decommissioned in 1946 and later sunk as a target ship. USS Stack was decommissioned in 1946 and scrapped in 1947. None of the ships survived into the Cold War era, but their legacy did. Moosbrugger continued his naval career after the war. He commanded various destroyer squadrons and cruiser divisions. He received promotion to Rear Admiral in 1950. He served as commander of Cruiser Division 6 during the Korean War. He retired from the Navy in 1954 with the rank of Vice Admiral. He died in 1974 at age 76. His obituary in the New York Times mentioned Vella Gulf specifically. The newspaper called it one of the most decisive small unit actions in the Pacific War. That assessment was accurate. The Battle of Vella Gulf lasted 26 minutes. It involved 6 American destroyers against 4 Japanese destroyers. It resulted in 3 enemy ships sunk and 0 friendly casualties. But its impact extended far beyond those simple statistics. Vella Gulf proved that American technology had caught up to and surpassed Japanese capabilities. It demonstrated that American tactical innovation could overcome Japanese combat experience. It showed that aggressive action produced better results than defensive caution. Most importantly, it broke the psychological dominance Japanese forces had maintained in night combat. After Vella Gulf, American destroyer sailors knew they could win. That confidence translated into more aggressive tactics, more decisive engagements, and more victories. By the end of 1943, American destroyers had achieved tactical superiority in the Solomon Islands. By mid-1944, that superiority extended across the Pacific. The patterns established at Vella Gulf repeated in engagement after engagement. American radar, American torpedoes, American tactical innovation, Japanese defeat. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about destroyer captains who rewrote the rules of naval warfare in 26 minutes of darkness. Real people, real innovation. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Commander Frederick Moosbrugger and the sailors of Vella Gulf don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.